I'm Keely from the Countryside Cakery. Today we're going to be working together to make a beautiful Easter cake using Sugar Art Canada's icing sheets. We will show you how to assemble the cake so that you have a strong foundation, a strong smooth foundation for the icing sheets, and decorate it so that you have a centerpiece for your Easter table. When Sugar Art Canada sends you the icing sheets, they come in an envelope like this. It's handy to keep the sheets right in the envelope. That way they're protected from any UV rays which could possibly damage the icing sheets. So inside the package you have this beautiful Happy Easter icing sheet. Nice bright colors on it that we can put onto our cake. It's in a nice zippered packet so that it keeps the moisture out. So we've got that. We have some other materials here. You'll see your course materials list. So things like a cutting mat, a ruler to make straight cuts on the sugar art itself. We've prepared three cake layers. These ones are 6 inches in diameter. So we have 3 of them. We have a cake drum on the bottom that's 8 inches in diameter. So looking at the icing sheet and matching it up to your cake, you know that there's going to be a bit of a gap even once you add some filling or buttercream in between the layers. So we will need to trim off some of this icing sheet, but we'll wait until we've got the buttercream all layered between the cake layers till we do that step. So one of the first things that we do, we have the buttercream all prepared. Today we're using Swiss meringue buttercream, but you could easily use American buttercream. Both of them have a moisture content that will allow the sugar art to properly adhere to the cake surface. So we're going to make sure that each one of these layers is completely level before we assemble the cake. So we'll take this one here first. This one here is not too bad in terms of being level. You want a serrated knife and then use the top of your cake layer as a guide and just take off that little tiny bit that's on the top of the sponge. So this particular cake is coconut, but you can use obviously any flavor that you'd like. So we're going to trim each one of these layers. So again, we're laying the knife flat on the top of the cake layer and just trimming the top. That gives us a nice flat surface for the buttercream. And this is our last layer. Again, we're just trimming off that little tiny bit. There isn't much rise in this type of sponge. We're going to use this cake drum here. It's nice and thick and sturdy, and it's about 3/8 of an inch wide, so that you're able to put, for example, a satin ribbon on here at the end just to finish it off nicely. So we have a full batch of Swiss meringue buttercream. So it's nice and smooth. I do like to mix up the buttercream typically for about 5 minutes or so by hand after you've whipped it. That allows the last few little bubbles that are in the buttercream to pop so that you have a nice smooth buttercream, and there's less using the actual cake smoother at that point. So we want to adhere our first layer onto the drum, so we just use a tiny wee bit of buttercream on the base. Make sure that your layer is securely on there. So this Swiss meringue buttercream is also coconut flavored to go with the flavor of the cake. So this particular spatula, the offset spatula, is what I use between the layers to get nice smooth buttercream. And a cake turntable definitely makes this process easier. So the next layer, that's the top. We're actually going to flip it to do the next layer. We're trying to put an equal amount of buttercream in between each each layer. Again, using the offset spatula just to make the buttercream even. So the top layer on your cake, you do want to have a nice flat top on your tier there. So even with a 6-inch 3-layer cake, I do like to use a dowel just to make sure that the foundation of the cake is really stable and sturdy. So we just want to make sure that it's not too long. You want to make sure it's a little bit beneath that top layer. And you just push it down right into the center of the cake. And then we're going to do our full crumb coat. If you want to save yourself a step, you can actually do a thicker layer of buttercream at this point, and it saves you having to do a separate crumb coat. So the offset spatula, I typically just use it on the top of the cake and then between the layers, and then you use your straight spatula to do the buttercream smoothing on your sides. So if you have any other fillings that are in your cake, you want to be sure that you've got nice sealed, that the buttercream properly seals between your layers. So this layer isn't going to be perfect. The crumb coat is not designed to look perfect on your first go round. It's just to seal in the crumbs for your cake. I'm slowly turning the turntable as we go. And if there's any cracks, make sure you're pushing the buttercream right into those cracks as you go. Okay, so all the cake surface is now covered with buttercream, but we do want to smooth out the crumb coat before we chill the cake. So I prefer just a straight, smooth cake smoother. This particular one's from the Flour Girl. So when you have a smoother like this, I find that the buttercream doesn't stick to the surface as much as if you were to use a plastic smoother. So we're holding the cake smoother on about a 45-degree angle, and we're slowly turning the turntable, allowing that buttercream to naturally flow into any of the cracks in the cake. Keeping even pressure on the smoother. You'll notice right now that there's slight little lines in the surface of the buttercream. That itself is not an issue. At the end, we smooth all of those out. And we just want to take the excess and put that back in. There's no crumbs in that, so you can go back into the bowl. And if you're finding there's any areas on the cake surface that are still, that still need some buttercream, then we go in and we add that at this point again. Having a very straight, smooth base to put your icing sheet on is very important. That will allow the sheet to properly adhere to the surface. Also making sure that if there's any gaps along the top, we're filling those in. And again, using our cake smoother, 45-degree angle, consistent pressure, slowly turning the turntable to smooth that layer of the crumb coat. So then we take an offset spatula, just a smaller version, and I'm going to clean up the top of the cake, these buttercream edges. So what I prefer to do is to use your offset spatula and slowly drag the buttercream towards you, cleaning off your spatula on your buttercream bowl between each time you clean. If you don't clean between each time, then you have little residual drag marks on your buttercream. Again, this is the crumb coat, so it doesn't have to be perfect, but you still want it as smooth as possible to save you some work later on. Okay, so our crumb coat is on the cake. Now we want to chill this for 10 to 15 minutes in the fridge just to firm this up, and then we'll do our final coat of buttercream, and then we'll adhere the sugar sheet. So we have our Sugar Art Icing Sheet, and we are pretty much ready to put this onto our cake, so we can take it out of the bag now. You don't want to do that in advance because the icing sheets, if you take them out of the Ziploc bag and expose them to the air for too long, they can actually dry up and get brittle. But as you can see right now, the sheet is very fluid. That's because we've kept it properly in the Ziploc bag. So this is the sugar art that we're going to be putting on our cake. We've measured our cake to know exactly the dimensions. So that's what I have this, it's a flexible sewing tape. So we need, it's actually quite a small section here. So about 12 centimeters or so, but we want to be sure that we are cutting evenly. So that's why this mat is helpful. You line it up with the ruler markings. Okay, and we have our, this is just a regular X-Acto knife is just fine. And again, that's why you need the cutting mat. So we're gonna cut right along the sugar sheet. Keeping firm pressure down. And quite often your X-Acto knife won't go through the plastic itself, which is fine, but it will go through the sugar sheet. We're using the mat as a guide and also the markings that are on the sugar sheet itself. May still have to trim up a little bit, but this is a good start. And again, that should just break easily right there. So these are excess pieces. Measure this again. It should be about right. Just gonna plop this back in here for a minute while we do our last coat of buttercream on our cake. So we're just gonna add a fresh layer of buttercream on the sides of the cake. That will allow the sugar art sheet to adhere. Give our buttercream a quick little stir before we get going. Again, we're just smoothing around the cake, creating a solid foundation. It's almost like building a house. So this is the layer when we're eventually finished, that it is important that it's extremely flat. And you want to be sure that you've got proper coverage of your buttercream all the way around your cake. So again, we're just using our smoother, 45-degree angle, consistent pressure. One of the last steps in creating the smooth surface on the sides of the cake is removing these vertical lines that are in the buttercream. There's a couple different ways of doing that. One is if you have a metal scraper like I do, you can run it under hot water and then wipe it dry, and then use the slightly warm smoother to completely take those lines out. Or I will show you the other method here in a moment. I'm just going to be extra particular about making sure that everything's smooth. Now, the sides of the cake are fairly smooth, with the exception of the vertical lines. So to remove the last little bit of vertical lines, you're going to use fairly light pressure this time, but obviously keeping the pressure fairly consistent and keeping your cake smoother at a 45-degree angle. You're going to pick your spot that you're starting, and you keep your hand at the same place as your smoother, and you're going to make it one clean fluid motion, not stopping, very slow, and your hand needs to meet your scraper on the other side. So that's how you get those last few vertical lines off of your buttercream. Then we just need to clean up the top, same method as before. I like my tools really clean, so I did wash them while the buttercream was setting up in the fridge. Again, we're cleaning our offset spatula between each swipe. Okay, so that is a fairly smooth cake now, both the top and the sides. So this is what we're going to use for our foundation for our icing sheet. So in between, doing the last couple details on the buttercream, I've kept the icing sheet in the Ziploc bag just so it keeps the moisture in the icing sheet at the same level. So this is what we're going to be adhering onto our cake. So to help achieve a very smooth surface, we're going to use a fondant smoother to help us give even pressure along the sugar sheet as we go. So you just peel it right off, and we are going to place the sugar sheet just on the cake using light pressure. And then taking your fondant smoother and slowly just making sure it adheres all the way around. Just like that. So there's your sugar art on the cake. Now we want to fancy this up a bit and tie it into the decor of the cake itself. So there's a number of ways of doing that. Today I have created some sugar art that matches the cake itself. So you have lavender buds and you have dandelions that will coordinate, as well as some Easter eggs and Easter confetti. So we do want to pipe buttercream just a slight bit to ensure that these sides of the sugar art don't peel off. So we're just going to trim the sugar art down to the edge of the cake surface, creating notches in the sugar art. And then we're going to slowly push these down and adhere them to the buttercream. There, they're all adhered. Now to finish off the cake, and also it will hide the seam, I'm going to do a little bit of piping on the top. So we have our piping tip here, that's a 6B tip, our 12-inch piping bag. I find the 12-inch piping bags are the perfect size for my hands. If I get larger than that, and we're doing detailed designs, it gets a little bit tough to maneuver the bag properly. So I have the tip in the piping bag, just gonna push it up a tiny wee bit and then snip there. Ensure that you can see the full end of your piping tip. Use your hand in a C type of shape. So you have a nice spot to load up your piping bag. We're gonna load up the piping bag with some more of our buttercream. And then just pull the sides up so it rests in there nicely. So we're going to fold the bag back to its seams. Use your hand, the palm of your hand, to push that buttercream down right to the end. And we're gonna pick a part of the back of our cake where you won't see us start the piping. It hides that seam if it's not perfect. So I usually pipe just a little star to begin with, and that kind of gives you a base to use when you're piping a nice border. Sometimes you have to pause, and that's okay. You pause when you're able to hide the join. So a nice fluid motion. And we're covering about 1.5 inches from the edges of the cake with our piping. Okay, so there's the piped border along the top, and it hides that join very nicely. Now we want to decorate it up so that the decor on the top matches the decor that's in the sugar art. So to do that, we have some lavender on here, we have some dandelions, and then we have the Easter eggs that we want to carry through to the top. So some of the small details can poke out just along the front of the cake. And make them look kind of sporadic. So these are made with satin ice fondant, and then I've used very small flower cutters, plunger cutters, to make these little shapes. I think the lavender and the dandelions look very springy. That's why I chose this. Be nice for Easter time on your kitchen table. Okay, so that's probably enough lavender. So I'm now going to put some of the dandelions in there. When you think about the cake and what the focal point is, people typically are going to be looking at this cake right straight on, as opposed to overhead. So the design details are going to also be on the same from the same vantage point. So we're just going to pull up some of the nice bright colors that are in the sugar art right up onto the decor. We're going to do that with some of this confetti. Almost looks like a birthday party. Who doesn't love that? So in most of these sprinkles like this, you could find, you know, at a bulk store or regular cake supply store. Most places would have that as well. Satin ice is one of the most common fondants that you can find. So there we have a little bit of detail on the border itself. We do have some Easter eggs also, so I'm kind of thinking that it might look neat to have some of those in a nest in the center. So we can place those Easter eggs in here. Colors coordinate really nicely. Stand them up a little bit. I'm just making sure that we have a good mix of colors in here for the decor. So there is our Easter cake. I am going to add a little bit of piping just down the side here just to cover these seams. But the decor itself is pretty much complete. Just gonna add a few little details down the side here. So this is a typical shell border where you use increased pressure to create a buildup of buttercream at the top and slowly make your way down. So again, you're allowing the buttercream to build up, allowing it to build up, bringing your hand down to create that shell. Up, then down, build up, down to create that shell border. And there's your Easter cake. So one of the last steps is making sure that this is ready for your Easter table to display it nicely. So flowers always help with that. So we have some flowers here today. Also choosing a cake stand that is the correct diameter for your cake. So this one you can see is about 10 inches in diameter, which makes it perfect for this cake because the drum itself that the cake is resting on is 8 inches. So when you pick a cake stand, make sure your cake stand is a little bit wider than your cake drum. So there's your cake. You can put flowers around it. So, you know, some nice little spring flowers, or in the country around here right now, we have pussy willows. So pussy willows on your table and a beautiful cake like this, and you're all ready for Easter supper. My name's Keely from the Countryside Cakery, and it's been a pleasure today to use Sugar Art Canada's beautiful sugar sheets. Thank you for joining us.